Welcome, everyone, to the Over Under Movies podcast, the show where we take a prominent film or franchise and ask the simple question, is it overrated or is it underrated? My name is Dylan DeAngelis. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host. He is the R2-D2 to my C-3PO. It's Mr. Jason Gong.
Beep boop, Dylan.
I know, we are so C-3PO and R2-D2 coded. Mm-hmm. It's not just because you're shorter than me.
Mm-hmm. It's because you're a gold-plated coward.
It's because I'm a little annoying and everybody loves you. We're also joined by two special guests on this pod. We have Carolyn and Nick, who are returning from our Star Wars prequels pod 1 year ago. May the 4th is once again upon us, so we get to do the fun movies this time. We were talking about the original Star Wars trilogy, that is Star Wars A New Hope, released in 1977, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, released in 1980, and Star Wars Return of the Jedi, released in 1983. Jason, we binged all of these movies last night. Well, you were watching them like periodically throughout the week in Spanish.
En español, sí.
And then we watched them last night in English. We can get to the objective rating and all that stuff later in the pod. I feel like we can just kind of like vamp a little bit here about the Star Wars films. Maybe the most influential and iconic movie franchise of all time. I don't think that's hyperbole. I'm guessing, did you guys both watch all the films for this podcast? Is there anything that stood out on this rewatch for you guys that was notable, stood out in any way?
Oh yeah, I definitely rewatched the movies for this. And the thing that stood out to me is how camp they are. I really forgot how crazy, like, the levels of camp are in this movie. And I thought it was really funny because I'm also reading a biography about George Lucas, and the one quote they had about him making these movies is he wanted them to not be camp. He wanted no camp in these movies. He wanted them to be totally different than other sci-fi movies, and I think he did a lot of good things, but he failed at that, so I thought it was funny.
I did rewatch them. I feel like with these, more than any of the other ones, it's like I've seen them so many times, and they're such a big part of the culture that nothing really feels a novel anymore, I guess. It almost feels like I didn't even turn the TV on and I'm just remembering it because I could. Because they're quoted so often or whatever. It's like especially the first one, it's like every single line somewhere has popped up in some other part of culture.
Yeah, it's weird. These movies are such a part of like the cultural zeitgeist now that you kind of have to like really like hone in and focus if you want to like actually pay attention to these movies, because especially like A New Hope, I've seen so many times. It's a movie, it's in my Letterboxd top 4. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I can quote it relentlessly. I was quoting it like as we were watching it last night. What I found most interesting on this rewatch, though, is just how much is in the movie that is not explained. But as somebody who's rewatching the films, you know what's going on. Like, you just look at it in the vacuum. I wish we could like watch it with somebody that's like knows nothing about Star Wars, like a literal alien. Because the first shot of the film where the stormtroopers are flooding in, and then you have Darth Vader, and then you have like C-3PO talking to R2-D2, and then you have Leia. Nothing is explained. You have the opening crawl of the first film, but that's it. That's the entirety of your context that's given to you. You don't know the names of these characters. You don't know exactly what the situation is that's going down. You haven't seen Rogue One, so you don't know that all of this stuff happened that led up to this moment of stealing the Death Star plans. And then they crash land on Tatooine, and then like it's like a whole nother movie starts. It's pretty crazy how a lot of the films nowadays, I feel like they would require far more exposition, front-loaded exposition, whether it was like voiceover or just like characters speaking out the exposition to one another. We don't get that at all. Lucas like wholly trusts the audience here to be enraptured by what's happening on screen. And that was something that was just like most impressive to me on rewatch here, where obviously you know the context of everything that's happening in these films now because you've seen all of the Star Wars stuff, but it's not explained overtly in the films, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I was trying to decide while I was watching it whether to think about all the context of like the prequels and stuff and let that inform my viewing experience, or to do the opposite and pretend I'd never seen the prequels. And then I was just like having that internal battle the whole time, so my brain wasn't really working. But that is like, it's interesting to try and view it for the first time again, by trying to forget all the other stuff and trying to like create a vacuum. That's why I watched it in Spanish, so that it would feel a little bit new to me.
Feels new.
So my main takeaway is that the dub is really strong, guys. If you guys are learning Spanish, or if you speak Spanish, I would recommend watching these movies.
These are also movies that have dubs in like every single language.
Every language. And the dubs really were good. Like, they all sounded like their voice act or their original actors. I watched The Simpsons in Spanish. Those guys don't sound right at all. But these guys nailed it. When Darth Vader says, "Yo soy tu padre," it felt just as emotional.
Wow.
as
Spoilers.
He said it in English. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Opening of episode 4, we see Luke encountering Obi-Wan Kenobi for the first time. And if you're somebody that knows the wider Star Wars canon, you know that Obi-Wan Kenobi knows everything. He knows who Luke is. He knows who Leia is. He was there when they were born. He watched their mom die. But if you're somebody that is watching this in 1977, you don't know any of the context. That's just Alec Guinness, who doesn't want to be there. He openly stated that he hated working on these movies. And he hates that was his acting legacy, was being Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. This guy who had been acting since like the 1930s. It's just interesting. Like, this level of world building, we just don't get it anymore. There are like countless attempts nowadays to create these science fiction universes, but none of them are is nearly as trusting of the audience as Star Wars. When you get that cantina scene in A New Hope, it's just this splash of like aliens and like random shit going on, and none of it's explained. Mainly because a lot of the aliens in that sequence are like, I think, just like puppets and masks that they found on like the backlots, and they just kind of made it work. And now all of those aliens are retconned into being actual species in Star Wars because of that one scene. It's just really cool, the level of detail. I don't know, Jason, is there anything else that stood out to you on this rewatch?
Yeah, I mean, I forgot that Alec Guinness kept coming back in those movies because he said he hated it.
Yeah, because he dies in the first one. You think, oh, he's just gone.
So in my mind, I guess I don't remember these as clearly as you, but like, it's like, oh, that guy just was one and done. He got in, he got out. But no, he kept coming back. And I thought that was funny. Like, knowing that he didn't like it, that makes it funnier that he kept coming back for the paycheck. I think I would say that I liked Return of the Jedi more on this, like, most recent time I watched it, because I know that people consider it the weakest of the trilogy. Or when I was reading about how the actors felt, they all wrote that they thought it was a weak ending to something that they had spent so many years on. But I thought it ended just fine. Like, I thought it was a good ending, strong. Like, Vader's redemption arc, I think, worked really well. So, yeah, I guess my takeaway is I'll go to bat for that one a little bit more now.
That's my favorite one.
Yeah, good choice.
What's your guys' rankings of these 3 movies?
I think it feels to me like what I would assume is the general opinion is like Empire, then A New Hope.
Then A New Hope, yeah.
The Jedi.
I would say that's consensus.
Yeah, I would agree with that on like a purely execution, like formal level, but I think in more of a thematic, like story level, I probably would also put Return of the Jedi first. I think I would say like Return of the Jedi, Empire, A New Hope.
Mm-hmm.
My reasoning for that, I guess, is the ending. I feel like the sentiment of Luke Skywalker throwing his lightsaber away at the end of Return of the Jedi feels so different than the sentiment of him blowing up the Death Star and us like being so excited that he's killed all these people. It's like 2 totally different ideologies.
Yeah. Luke changes a lot from like that first movie to the last one, and I feel like he barely is even a character when A New Hope happens. He's just like the prototypical hero of a hero's journey, and then he actually has to like learn stuff throughout the rest of the series. So the characters are all a lot stronger and better informed like throughout, and they really stick the landing in the third one.
I agree. I think New Hope has so much nostalgia around it, so I always want to put it higher on my list in ranking. But like the second and the third movies are really stronger character movies because I feel like they kind of figured it out as they went a little bit. I'm gonna go back to the book that I'm reading. I'm only halfway through, so he just started writing Star Wars, and the way he wrote it was crazy to me. He just wrote down characters that he wanted to include in the movies and then tried to put the story together from there, and it really feels like that's kind of what happened in the first one a little bit, is he kind of just like stuck them all together, hoped it worked. And then the second and the third movies, he really figured out a way to make it work as a story a little bit more, less just what he wanted to try to create.
Yeah, well, the first Star Wars film, it famously now, was saved largely in the editing process. George Lucas shot all this stuff. Apparently, the first cut was really bad. And then his wife, Marcia Lucas, worked on the editing. She has an editing credit for the film and fixed a lot of the stuff, especially in the back half of the movie. I believe this is correct, that the plot point of the Death Star slowly approaching the Yavin base, like that being the tension of the end of the film, is completely done in editing. And it's something that I focused on this rewatch. And every single time that you cut to a character that's not in an X-Wing at the end of the movie, none of their speaking lines are like from their mouth. It's always like somebody talking from a computer, or it's like a Darth Vader line, so you don't see his mouth. So it's all stuff that could have been done in post, that the Death Star is approaching the Yavin base slowly. I believe in the original version of the script, it's just they went and destroyed the Death Star, and that was it. And so that added tension of them potentially destroying the Yavin base with the Death Star is pretty critical. It's pretty important. And the fact that wasn't in like the original cut is pretty wild. I know that some people, shout out to Red Letter Media, have the opinion that George Lucas is the luckiest man in Hollywood history, that he kind of like fell backwards into what Star Wars became. I mean, nobody could have anticipated what Star Wars became. It was a cultural phenomenon. It's like the OG blockbuster at this point. It's the reason that we have the MCU. It's the reason why we have like all these companies now looking for the next great franchise of their own. But Star Wars is a wholly original franchise for film. It's not based on books or anything like that, even though Lucas was using a lot of old like Buck Rogers and like different like TV serials from like the 40s, and then obviously Japanese samurai films from the 50s and 60s is stark influences. I mean, you look at the Darth Vader helmet, it's just a samurai helmet. My rank for the three films is A New Hope, Empire, and then Return of the Jedi. I think A New Hope is like insanely tight of a movie. Obviously, it's kind of cheating, right? Because it's the film that didn't need to focus on having a franchise come out of it. Good look on them having Darth Vader survive that first film. They could have just had him blow up on the Death Star too, right?
Yeah, true.
And what do you do then? Oh shit, we killed Vader. What do we do for the sequel?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. A New Hope is like a perfect movie. It has like less that it needs to do with its characters, but it tells like a full story like within the one movie.
It's tight. Like, it's 2 hours long. The first half hour is everything getting up to like Mos Eisley, and then they have them getting off the planet within like an hour of the film starting, and then they have 30 minutes that is just them on the Death Star, and then you have the final 30 minutes, which is the Death Star run. It's so clean, and it's such a easy movie to watch. I think the other two have pacing issues, frankly. I think both Return of the Jedi and Empire have really strong openings. Like the Hoth sequence is great, the Jabba's Palace sequence is great, and then they kind of have like a middle section where they need things to happen because they can't just skip right to the lightsaber battles, which is, you know, what you pay the price of admission for. And I think in those middle parts of both of those second two movies are a little weak in my opinion, which is why I always found it interesting that people like Empire the best. Why do you think Empire is considered the best of these three movies by like general consensus?
I think that I Am Your Father twist was really emotional for people back then. Like for us, I mean, I don't even know how old I was when I saw that movie for the first time. So that's like Darth Vader being Luke's dad is just a fact of life for me.
Yeah, it's one of the all-time greatest movie twists, and if you've never seen this franchise now, you just know that.
Yeah, so with that, like ending it that way with that twist, and also ending on a dark note, like the good guys kind of lose by the end of that movie, was a very bold choice. So people walked out of the theaters really emotional and excited for what's going to happen next, I think. So I can see why people like that. People like when a sequel comes back bigger and then goes a little bit darker with it. I think that's why people like the second season of Avatar: The Last Airbender too. It follows a very similar formula.
Yeah, or why people like Avengers Infinity War more than Endgame.
Mm-hmm.
It leaves off on that dark ending.
Mm-hmm.
I also think the training with Yoda is like very crucial to why people like that movie so much. It's just like when I think of that movie, that's what I think of. It's the lightsaber battle at the end is great. Like the Luke, I'm your father, great. But I think about the training on Dagobah. Like the sets are just so good. The puppet work with Yoda is so good. And it introduced like this really space part of it that wasn't really like there was aliens, there was that, but it wasn't to that level until that moment. So I think that's why it really sticks with people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it like digs more deeply, like psychologically, than the other ones. Also, there's a lot more focus on like how am I supposed to deal with myself in Luke's case, and how do we all deal with each other in the other cases. It feels significant that like the movie like kind of starts, but then in that middle chunk, everybody is kind of like trapped in place a little bit, with nothing to do but really like explore their own motivations or whatever.
Which is why the characters feel so much more fleshed out in the second one, because they spend the time, even though not a lot of action happens, they're building those characters, they're becoming a team, they're really figuring it out together. Luke is becoming who he's going to be.
And it's one of the most like it's one of the strongest movie trios ever with Han, Luke, and Leia. When they do the starring in the end credits, they always put their three names together.
Mm-hmm.
They're like the backbone of these movies. Which is interesting considering like those three actors had very different paths of getting into Star Wars. Harrison Ford was a carpenter. He was 35 when the first Star Wars came out. And then Mark Hamill's like 26, I think, something like that. And then Carrie Fisher is a Nepo baby. She was 21. This was one of her first roles. And they just like work seamlessly together. I mean, shout out to Harrison Ford being as good looking as he is. I hope I look that good at 35. He's great because like as soon as you see him on screen, you're like, this is the guy. He's so charming. He's so charismatic. We did a Tron episode last week, and you were saying about Garrett Hedlund that like he just didn't have it. He didn't have the it factor that you need to be the charismatic guy that's always quipping.
Yeah, sorry, Garrett Hedlund, if you're watching.
Harrison Ford is the poster child for it.
Yeah, well, we were watching Tron. I was like, man, this guy just doesn't have it. And Dylan was like, what if he was Harrison Ford? And I was like, oh my God, that movie would be great.
It'd be perfect. Yeah, and then you have all of the supplemental cast. You have Chewbacca, C-3PO, R2-D2, which are now like iconic characters. We have a little section in our outline now for our new objective scoring system of cultural relevance and iconic moments and characters. It's the entire films. You could pick out like literally anything from these movies.
Yeah, like you said, there's now backstories for everyone at the cantina scene. There's backstories for all of like the bounty hunters that you see for like 1 second in Empire. And everyone's cosplayed as everyone. So it's a very culturally relevant movie.
Yeah. Speaking of cosplay, we were talking about this a little last night. I want to get both of your input on this. Because we talked about, Jason, I think we talked about in our Tron episode that cosplay is very important in determining the cultural relevance of any sort of, nerd product. Mm-hmm. If there's a lot of cosplay, if there's a lot of fan art, if there's a lot of fan fiction, that means that it's good, it's popular. So what do we think are all-time the top 5 Star Wars cosplays? This is a conversation that came up when we were watching Return of the Jedi, and I asked Jason, is Slave Leia in the top 5, specifically Slave Leia?
Did you look up the right answers, or are you just
I'm not looking this up. I'm not putting that in my search history.
Do you mean like what we would assume to be the most popular cosplays, or like what are the best ones?
I think the most frequented cosplays. Because like, what do you think is more common? Somebody cosplaying as Luke Skywalker or as Slave Leia?
I think it's Leia. I
also think Slave Leia is in the top 5.
Like, it's not just Slave Leia. It's like you're gonna do the Lego version. You're gonna be someone else dressed as Leia. Like, it's just more than even what it is. But you can't do that with Luke. Luke is just gonna be Luke.
Yeah, at least for Leia, yeah, you could do like the hair buns, or she has several iconic looks in these movies.
I would say just the character of Leia is probably the most cosplayed, but that's because like she's the one female character out of the franchise.
Yeah, we could talk about that a little bit
Probably,
in a minute.
like, I would say that there's more female cosplayers than male cosplayers. So, yeah, Leia definitely has to be number one.
Tempted to assume Darth Vader.
I think Vader's in the top 5 for sure.
Partially just because it feels simple. I would imagine you can just buy a Vader outfit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can buy them now. I'm sure, yeah, back in the day, you'd have to like build that thing. The Vader costume specifically is something I noticed that it gets better and better in the 3 movies. And the first one is a little rough. You can see you can almost see like fingerprints in the plastic.
That does feel like one of those little like execution things that adds a lot, even though it's really subtle. I feel like when I think about the original trilogy, one of the first things I think about is the way the light reflects off of Darth Vader's helmet.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess also the like floors and
Yeah, it's very sci-fi. It's the opening scene of the film where you have that entire white hallway and the light's just reflecting off of everything. And then you have this guy in this all black suit come through the doorway. The contrast it's great. And it looks really good. And I mean, there's a lot of like bad science fiction films made in the 70s and 80s that their sets don't look remotely as polished. I mean, that's probably like the greatest thing about these movies is how well they've stood the test of time. You watch a movie from 1977 and it looks just as good as a movie released nowadays, especially with the 4K restorations that we watched on Disney Plus. They're really good. Yeah, I'm going to say Vader. I'm going to say Slave Leia specifically is in the top 5. Boba Fett is also in the top 5.
I would imagine C3PO is very unpopular.
Especially, I mean, Anthony Daniels didn't even like being in the C3PO costume. It was like horribly painful, and he could like barely move. And anytime that like 3PO had to run, I mean, he was basically just like shuffling his feet to move forward. That's a tricky one. I guess because not even like Jedi. There's like barely any Jedi in these movies.
Oh, I think just generic stormtroopers probably in the top 5.
Yeah, stormtroopers.
It's a really easy group costume. And there are some guys, there's like a group called the 501st Legion or something. And it's just a club for people who cosplay as stormtroopers. No, that's a thing. I have their card.
I do love how, like, Mark Hamill is very clearly like 4 inches shorter than Harrison Ford. And when he puts on the stormtrooper outfit, it does look big on him, which is really funny. The helmet is just like constantly moving around while he's walking. And it makes it even better that Leia like dings it immediately when she says, "Aren't you a little small to be a stormtrooper?"
Yeah. So do they have like height requirements to join up?
It's something I was kind of looking for after that moment. Anytime they have like a squad of stormtroopers, I was checking heights. I was like, are they all like around the same height? They got a couple short guys in there. They were fudging it a bit. We want to talk about the Ewoks real quick. Ewoks are they cool or are they dumb?
I'm pro Ewok. I like how much the movie. I think overall, because I think they do this with Yoda to undermine our imagery of what like heroism looks like. I like how much the thing that they're using against the Empire is the Empire's like underappreciating things like that, I guess. Or yeah, they're like underestimating or overlooking these things that seem to have a degree of, I don't know, kindness or something like that. It feels like the Ewoks like represent something larger than themselves.
I think they do. I think like the Ewoks represent the little guy because that's the whole thing. They're the underdog. The Resistance is the underdog. Like everything Star Wars is an underdog story. So like why would the Ewoks on this planet, this moon that like they're not even a concern of the Empire or because they're not doing anything about them. Like they know they live there. They're so unconcerned with them. So they represent the whole thing. And also, they're just the best. They're like why I think I like the third one so much. Because when I was a kid, like that was my favorite part of it.
Well, they're the most divisive part of the third film because adult Star Wars fans think it's a childish thing to have in the film when, you can say it, Jason.
What?
They're children's films.
Yeah, definitely.
Star Wars is a children's film franchise that has now been co-opted because Star Wars fans grow old, and then they want adult Star Wars.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot in our prequel episode, so you guys should go check that out.
Oh yeah, I will.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, the Ewoks. I like the Ewoks too, and I was saying this last night, but like they're so adorable and it's very funny. But also, like you guys were saying, they represent something bigger.
They represent the Viet Cong.
Yeah, George Lucas specifically was like, these are the Viet Cong, which is cool. But they also represent like the power of nature, whereas the Empire is like this imperial technology group. It just shows that like all of that power, you know, you have something that can blow up planets, but the little guy, the power of nature is going to overcome that every time.
Yeah, they feel like they represent like the way resistance is permanent and like will always be occurring on like a rational level. Like but just by disturbing the balance of life or I don't know, nature or whatever, of the environment, then that environment is by default going to resist that disruption.
Yeah.
Like an Avatar.
Well, that's straight out of Nemec's recordings from Andor. Shout out to Andor for all the Andor heads. Have you guys watched the new season yet?
Yes.
It just came out this past week. The first 3 episodes. I love Andor. Well, maybe we'll do an Andor pod in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this character named Nemec who we get introduced to in the bank heist story from season 1, and his whole thing is that he's doing like recordings of like the art of war and the art of resistance, and he talks about how like imperial overreach is a constant battle. It takes so much effort because you will always have these little rebellions popping up everywhere constantly, and that the Rebel Alliance that we see in the original Star Wars films is a culmination of all of these smaller efforts into an entire unit. It's actually something that's like a little inconsistent, I feel like, in these movies. They don't do a very good job at showing the resources that the rebels do have. It kind of goes back and forth between, like, you go to the Yavin base and you see all of these crew, you see all of these people, and then you have that final shot of episode 4 where it seems like the Rebel Alliance is like pretty big and, you know, they're pretty well funded. And then we get to the beginning of episode 5 and they're on Hoth and they're like running away. And you don't know if this is a large rebel force anymore. And then by the end of episode 6, you're saying, oh, this is it. The rebels are like done. They've killed them all. So it feels like a little inconsistent there, where maybe showing the Empire having like way more ships or something like that than them would make it feel like they had more to overcome. Talk about the Death Star. Why did they put a second Death Star in episode 6? Could they not think of something cooler for them to like go fight?
Well, I think it also kind of reflects the lack of creativity on the part of the Empire. But they made a big weapon, and they are a big weapon.
Let's just make it again.
That's how they're going to see everything, I guess.
I like that.
And that's a mirror for people writing Star Wars as well, because they can't think of anything new. So J.J. Abrams goes, what if we just like make a whole planet that's the Death Star? That'll be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Talked a little bit about Leia being the most popular female cosplay due to the fact that she's the only woman in the film, essentially. Do you think that that's just like a side effect of the 70s and 80s in Hollywood, that there's not more female characters or female extras? Or I even was like reading the credits, not a lot of female names in the credits either.
I think it's just the time, unfortunately. Like, if you think about most movies from that period, like, there was the female character and there weren't women that worked on the film. There weren't, like, it's just what it is. You think about Indiana Jones, there's the girl. You think about James Bond, there's the girl. Mm-hmm. And she's at least got some motivation and, like, character. So I think that's why people attach to her so much, and it becomes a more well-loved character than a lot of other like 70s women in film. But
yeah, she I feel like George Lucas definitely was just like, well, we need a female, and she needs to be the love interest to the person that they go rescue. But then, probably after he cast Carrie Fisher and realized how cool she was, he was like, we got to make this lady awesome. And so she gets like really funny lines. And then I think, I could be wrong, but I think she's the best shot in the original trilogy. Like, I think she lands the most percentage of her laser gun hits. So she's like a pretty competent character as well. And then like they go so far as like by the third movie, they're like, oh yeah, she's also Vader's daughter and she has the Force within her. So even though she's the only female character, she is a really, really cool one.
Yeah, I mean, these movies in general just do so much retconning because obviously the first film was not built in a way that was meant to be the first film of a trilogy. So, I mean, even like through Empire, I was making a lot of jokes last because Luke and Leia kiss at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. And then every reveal of Luke and Leia being siblings in Return of the Jedi, you're just like, oh no. we don't have to talk about that, I guess. Yeah, though we do get a second female character in the sixth movie. We get Mon Mothma, who,
Yeah, she's great.
if you've seen Andor, Genevieve O'Reilly she's great as Mon Mothma. It's a really good way to flesh out that character. Have any of you watched the Star Wars Holiday Special?
Yeah, I don't really remember it that well though.
It's absolutely something you need to watch, like a YouTube video of somebody else watching and giving commentary on. Do not watch. It's so bad. It's also like, it's boring bad. It was a variety show that they had to like shoehorn Star Wars into, and it was horrible. Though it was our first time seeing Boba Fett in the series, which is
That's crazy.
incredible.
I wonder how it would play if you were to compare it, instead of comparing it to other Star Wars things, if you compared it to like other Christmas specials from the time.
Yeah.
But I guess it maybe wouldn't have the reputation it does unless it was unusually bad, even by that standard.
Yeah, I feel like it must be. Although I don't know any other variety show Christmas specials, but they had to have been better, right? But I don't know. They didn't have Boba Fett.
Yeah, the craziest thing about the holiday special, for anybody that hasn't seen it, is that the core story of the holiday special is about Chewbacca going home to Kashyyyk with his family. And Chewbacca's family entirely speaks in the Wookiee language with no subtitles. So all the sequences are just Wookiees talking to other Wookiees with no one there translating. It's crazy. That's what I kind of love about, like, George Lucas is just a crazy person a little bit, where he'll just put aliens that can't speak English all over these movies. And sometimes you'll have somebody translating. Sometimes you'll have somebody that by their responses, you kind of understand what the alien is saying. And then sometimes he just leaves you out to dry. You just kind of like have to assume what the alien's saying. I think it really builds out the universe really well.
Yeah, and I like how like with Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien, he like carefully crafted an elven language and dwarven words, and there's like you can learn the language and translate them, but you just know that in Star Wars, it's just nonsense, and he just had people ad-libbing on the day the silliest noises they could do.
Yeah, that's great. He was on record of like just kind of making things up on the fly when he was making these movies. What was the story from the prequels where there was like a CGI artist that asked him like what color Yoda's blood is because he'd be able to see like his blood through his veins, and George Lucas was like, I don't know, green. Like he doesn't give a shit. It's not important. I think that's the biggest difference that you can look at with the original trilogy versus everything that's come after the original trilogy, in that I think these movies focus a lot more on being just like kids' films and fairy tales more than trying to be this giant, expansive, like science fiction epic that the franchise has become. And I think that's why a lot of people prefer the original trilogy over everything else, is because you're looking back at like the simpler times of Star Wars. You can watch that first movie and you go, this is great. It's just like a really solid story. Mm-hmm. And then you get to something like Rise of Skywalker and you're like, this is such a fucking mess. And there's so much stuff that they're trying to put in here. And then you got to worry about, like fan service and callbacks. These movies are the making of the fan service and the callbacks. It's just like good stuff that's in the movie.
Maybe that's why they brought the Death Star back. It was the very first fan service in a franchise.
They do start bringing stuff back. I think, This Is Where the Fun Begins? That comes up in one of the sequels. I got a bad feeling about this. Comes up again in the sequels.
They say that in every movie.
Yeah.
We got that right at trivia last year for Star Wars trivia. It's said in every single Star Wars movie.
We came in first place, just so the listeners know.
Wow. I guess we can get into our objective ratings here, Jason. We have a new system in place to try to determine the objective score for Star Wars. This is a bit of a formality in this case, but we're going to go through it anyway. Get a reps in. The first star that we can assign, we have 5 stars that we can assign the film. The first star is for cultural impact. I have a feeling we're going to give it the full star here, but just to look at all of the culture that has come out of this movie and these 3 movies. So we have the 6 additional main series films. We have the Clone Wars animated series. We have Rogue One. We have the Han Solo film. We have Mandalorian. We have Mandalorian and Grogu coming out next year. We have the Star Wars Starfighter movie that's coming out in 2 years. And then we have all of the animated series, which I don't even know about all of these animated shows. There's one called Star Wars Droids in 1985. There's one called Star Wars Ewoks in 1986. Star Wars Clone Wars in the mid-2000s. And then we had The Clone Wars, which is the main series from 2008 to 2020. Star Wars Rebels, Star Wars Resistance, Star Wars The Bad Batch, Star Wars Visions, Star Wars Tales of the Jedi, Young Jedi Adventures, Tales of the Empire. There's a Darth Maul series coming out, apparently. And then there is The Ninth Jedi, which is another Star Wars Visions. We also have the live-action television shows. We have The Mandalorian. We have The Book of Boba Fett. We have the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. We have Andor, Ahsoka, The Acolyte, and Skeleton Crew. Just a few things came out of these movies.
I think you could also cite essentially all blockbusters after Star Wars.
Well, that's the interesting thing where George Lucas is very clearly just doing like an epic hero story, a very like cookie cutter hero story with Luke in these movies. But because he does it so well, every movie is trying to duplicate what Star Wars does, where you have the fish out of water main character who is off on their own doing nothing with their life, and then they're thrust into some sort of like epic story where they're the center of it, whether they're like a chosen one or they're just the hero of the story. Star Wars didn't invent that, but it probably invented it for movies specifically.
People at least like have it in their mind when they're making something similar.
Because when you're writing a story, or if you're writing a screenplay that is within this genre, even remotely, you can just use Star Wars as like a template. You can say, I have this character, then they go and they meet this character, they go to this location. It's tight. These movies are like 2 hours long also, which is fucking awesome. I was saying to you yesterday that if they made these films nowadays, they'd be what, 2 hours, 40 minutes?
2.5 at least, yeah. And those movies were even shorter because the versions we watched are the ones where they added scenes back in for the special editions. So they were even tighter back then.
Yeah, all the special edition stuff in these it's jarring anytime you see it on screen.
Yeah.
And then we have all the iconic characters. We have Luke Skywalker, we have Leia, Han Solo, Darth Vader, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, Chewbacca, C-3PO, R2-D2, Palpatine, Lando, Jabba the Hutt, Boba Fett, Admiral Akbar. Shout out to Admiral Akbar. All these characters that have just been riffed like endlessly by other properties. I would say that, we'd probably give it the full star here. What do you think? A+ for cultural impact.
I'd be curious to know what would get it if not Star Wars.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about the next star. Craft and performances. We have all the actors, which the actors are kind of interesting to talk about because this is, outside of maybe Harrison Ford, this is the peak of all of their careers. This is the peak of George Lucas's career. This is the peak for Mark Hamill. This is the peak for Carrie Fisher. Harrison Ford, you can argue Indiana Jones is bigger, but I would say that Han Solo is bigger than Indiana Jones as a character.
I think he's better in Indiana Jones, but I do agree.
Yeah, culturally, more people know Han Solo just because more people have seen Star Wars.
Yeah, like I mean, Carrie Fisher became more of like a producer and like a
writer.
As she got older, so she wasn't focusing nearly as much on like front of camera work. And then Mark Hamill became a voice actor basically if you list like Mark Hamill's top 5 roles, it's Luke Skywalker, and then a bunch of animated roles. It's the Joker, and it's Firelord Ozai. Yeah, and then George Lucas, this was his 3rd film that he had done. He did THX 1138 when he was at USC Film School, and he did American Graffiti in 1973, and then A New Hope in 1977, and then he's just like disappeared off the face of the earth since he sold Star Wars for what, $4 billion, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Good for him.
The second film is directed by Irvin Kershner, who, and the third one's Richard Marquand. These guys that neither of them really did much else directing wise, which I guess that's like a piece of trivia that not everybody knows, that George Lucas didn't direct all 3 of these films. His story credit on all 3 films. He has a screenplay credit on 2 of them, I think. I don't think he has a screenplay credit on Empire.
Mm-hmm.
That's Lawrence Kasdan. And then we have Gary Kurtz, who's the producer for all 3 films. It's very important. And I would say the most important behind the camera person in the entire franchise, John Williams. I mean, is this franchise what it is without the music? If you just put like generic science fiction music in these movies, does it hit the same?
Absolutely not. It's so important. I work at a music venue, and we have like movie showings, and the orchestra will play the music backing track live, and it gives me chills every time when that first chord hits and the scroll starts to go. It's like nothing else, and nothing else has been able to quite capture it. I feel like, I know John, he did other movies, but what he is able to do with Star Wars is incredible.
Yeah, I agree. The same way we talk about Star Wars impacting other movies and causing franchises to happen, I think John Williams' score very much affected the way that other people scored movies ever since then. Yeah, so it's very iconic and it's very good.
Yeah, and they knew they were cooking with gas too, because the Imperial March is everywhere in these 3 movies. They play it so many times. Yeah, I think like without the music, I think it just doesn't have like the same feel, for sure. John Williams is great. He's, I think, the most nominated person in Oscars history, because there was portions of the 80s where like 75% of the best score nominees were just John Williams scores. Dude's crazy. And then we could talk about like all of the technical aspects of the film here. These movies are revolutionary when it comes to practical effects, stop motion. They were basically just inventing new ways to do special effects to make these movies work. They hold up crazy well, especially all the miniature work. Basically, all the ships in these movies are miniatures, except for stuff that they CGI'd in the remasters. It just looks great. And without these movies, we don't get Industrial Light and Magic, which worked on tons of films that we've talked about in this podcast, Jason. And then we also probably don't get Pixar, because the people that founded Pixar started at ILM. So the reverberations of like the technical side of the Star Wars films are seen everywhere in movies now. So I think we can give it the full star for that one. I don't know. What do we think? Any pushback on the full star?
For craft and performance.
For craft and performances, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, they did okay.
All right, let's get to the 3rd star. That's critics' consensus. Rotten Tomatoes scores are 94, 93, and 83 for these movies. So yeah, Return of the Jedi is a bit lower than the other ones.
83 so low. That's very silly.
When talking about awards, A New Hope won 7 Oscars in 1977. Did not win Best Picture. What movie won Best Picture in 1978, Jason? Nick, do you know?
Annie Hall.
It is Annie Hall.
Wow.
Directed by Woody Allen.
Annie Hall is not as good as Star Wars. I'll be the first to say it.
That was like the Annie Hall Oscars, that one. And it was just beating Star Wars at like all these big categories. It was nominated for Best Director, didn't win. It was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Alec Guinness, didn't win. It was nominated for Best Screenplay, didn't win. But didn't win a bunch of the technical categories, obviously, and it won Best Score. The other ones, I'm trying to see here. This is one of like the rare times that they just gave all the awards to the first movie, which is interesting. Empire Strikes Back won for Best Sound and Visual Effects, and then Return of the Jedi won for Best Visual Effects. So by the time we got to the second 2 Star Wars films, they were relegated to basically what we see from MCU films nowadays, where they'll get like a visual effects award and that's it.
Yeah, that's crazy. Do you know what won Best Picture those other years?
I don't have the list of all of the films that they lost to now. But yeah, pretty surprising in hindsight, right? That you would think that these films, especially like once you get to Empire and Star Wars, is this giant cultural phenomenon that by that point it would just be winning all the awards. But no, it was still shunned by the critics back then. But I mean, it won a bunch of like other awards, and it won a lot of Grammys for Best Original Score, Best Instrumental Composition. So I would say it's another full star. Yeah.
Yes.
So we're at 3. We're at 3 stars.
Okay.
The 4th star is audience reception. Looking at Letterboxd, which of these 3 films do you think has the highest Letterboxd score?
Empire.
Yeah, I would think Empire, but I would also guess that A New Hope is close.
All of them are close. Empire has a 4.4, A New Hope has a 4.2, and Return of the Jedi is a 4.1.
Nice.
So interesting, if you look at like the bar graphs of what people rate them, it's a lot of 5-star reviews and then a lot of like 3-star reviews. It's people that either really love it or think that they're just pretty good. And I guess that like weights it closer to like the 4-star territory.
I would imagine a lot of people are also like justifiably exhausted by how much Star Wars is like on cereal boxes. I could definitely understand why someone would like go into Star Wars like not like really wanting to not like it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who didn't watch it growing up, and she will not watch them. We tried to make her watch one, and she was like, I didn't like it. Because she just decided that she didn't like it before she even wanted to watch it, because I think she had that like Star Wars exhaustion, because too many people hype it up so much that if you have never seen it, and maybe if I guess sci-fi kind of has to be your thing too. Like if you're not a sci-fi person, you've never seen them before, the hype is there, and you watch it, you're like, oh, this is just a fine movie. I don't know why people like it. But if you go in with an open mind, I think you can see it for what it is and that it's a great movie.
Yeah, Star Wars is dope. I do think that people who are giving it 3 stars are trying to like overcompensate. They're trying to be like, I'm a real film person. So this is average for me.
Yeah, it's impossible to judge these movies in a vacuum because, I mean, I don't know what your guys' stories are for the first time you saw Star Wars, but like I watched them on VHS in the late 90s. My mom had a set of those VHS tapes that had the interviews with George Lucas at the beginning of them. The beginning of the VHS was like a 20-minute interview with George Lucas that you had to fast forward through to get to the actual movie.
Were those the special editions, or was that before that?
I don't know if those were the special editions or not. There were the box VHSs that had like the faces, like half the face was the cover.
Yeah, I think that's what.
And that's what I watched, and I watched them as a kid, not knowing fully what Star Wars was. And like kids nowadays, there's no shot that any of them get that experience, right? You immediately know that Star Wars is this giant thing.
Yeah, it's in Fortnite.
Kids have to know it.
Kids all know.
Looking at the box office for these films is also kind of interesting. A New Hope made 775 million worldwide. Its adjusted domestic gross was like 1.6 billion, something like that. Made an absurd amount of money. But then when you look at Empire and Return of the Jedi, both of them made significantly less than A New Hope.
Mm-hmm.
Empire made 549 million and Return of the Jedi made 482 million, which is kind of backwards if you look at the numbers of original movies and sequels nowadays. Usually the sequels do better. So it's weird seeing the drop off from Empire and Return of the Jedi. I have no like good explanation off the top of my head why that would have been.
My only assumption would be that people went to the first one more times. Like there were more like repeat viewings for A New Hope, but I don't know.
Yeah, or maybe it was the case of there wasn't a lot of competition at the theater or something like that.
There weren't other Star Wars clones.
Well, that's part of the reason why like Avatar ended up with the box office that it ended up in, is that it hit this like sweet spot where it was the only big movie in theaters for like a solid 2 months. Mm-hmm. And we've like, it was in 2009. We've never seen that ever again, where a movie was really popular and it just could like sit by itself at the box office for that long. And it's possible that that's what happened in 1977 with New Hope. But I think it's still enough that we can give it the full star here for audience rating. We can get on to our final star, which is the most fun of the stars, is the host rating. Jason, I think we can give our co-hosts here half a star to work with. And so both of you now have a half a star that you can donate to our objective rating on your own. I guess we can start with Nick. Would you give this film your full half a star?
Yeah, sure.
So bring us to 4.5. Sounds good.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Nostalgia and all the other reasons, definitely.
So that brings us to an objective score of 5 out of 5 stars.
Wow, perfect movie.
Now we get to the title of the podcast. We get to determine,
Oh yeah.
are the 3 Star Wars films overrated or underrated with a star rating of 5 out of 5?
Oh, I forgot we had to do this.
And I gotta be honest, pretty tricky one here.
Yeah, that's tough. I don't want to say Star Wars is overrated. That would be crazy.
I guess I'll start. I'm going to say it's still underrated at this point, even if you're giving it a perfect score. And I think what ultimately makes these films underrated is the cultural impact is like incalculable. The repercussions of what these movies did with filmmaking writ large. There are so many movies, there are so many franchises, there are so many like technical companies that wouldn't exist if it weren't for the success of these movies. So the success of the films transcends so far beyond what we see on the screen for these first 3 Star Wars films that there's like no score that you can give these movies that would make it overrated, in my opinion. It's like maybe the only franchise I could say that about. Mm-hmm. I feel like every other major film franchise that is beloved, you could probably poke holes in somewhere, even if you're nitpicking, whether it's, I don't know, like Lord of the Rings or like Toy Story, or like pick a trilogy where people think all 3 films are amazing. I just think Star Wars is like head and shoulders above the rest just because of where in the timeline they are. They did this in the 70s and early 80s. They did this before computer CGI existed. Yeah. It's fucking crazy.
They're the blueprint to a trilogy. So I think you have to say that they're underrated. Even, I mean, some people might say like, oh no, 5 stars is like fair, perfectly rated. But I think even then, with all the stuff that you just said, I think it's underrated because the cultural impact of them is so crazy.
I think there are like elements that are either over or underrated. I do think like compositionally they're maybe a little overrated. Things like I guess more like technical aspects like cinematography, acting, the story, I suppose. That like if you like break down the different components, I think each one, yeah, like you said, you can really like poke holes in. But I do feel like overall there is some like greater sum of its parts that kind of transcends that. It's almost like in a way the weaknesses become features rather than bugs, and maybe that's because of the cultural significance or whatever, or the way, I don't know, it just becomes like part of people's lives. Like it's like a shorthand for their childhood or something like that. So it's like that. It seems like that's why people get so mad about things like the special editions, because like they're used to the things.
It's like even like mistakes in the films are considered beloved. Like in A New Hope, when the stormtrooper hits his head on the door frame, like it's just iconic now.
That's part of the movie.
That, and in 1977 when they shot that guy just fucked up his take and they left it in, and now it's iconic.
Yeah, I would say that Star Wars is still underrated because, like Caroline said, we still have friends who refuse to watch these movies and think it's going to be bad. And then you've got the people on Letterboxd who definitely love this movie but are giving it 3 stars because they don't feel like it's a enough movie to deserve 5 stars. People look at this as the blueprint for modern franchises, and they associate all the bad things that modern franchises, including Star Wars, have attached to them. And I think it makes it hard to look at these movies in a vacuum, but I think in a vacuum, they're like, pretty perfect films worthy of that 5-star objective rating we just gave them.
Yeah, so it sounds like, consensus is underrated. There are definitely elements of these films that that are probably a little bit overrated. I actually think if we separate these into individual films, I think it's easier to argue that some of these films individually might be a bit overrated.
Mhm.
Specifically, Return of the Jedi. I kind of agree with the actors in that Return of the Jedi is such a weird like finale for these movies that they spend half the film just like running around with Ewoks on Endor is pretty wild. Like when you just watch it back, you go, "Wow, there's a lot of Ewok stuff that was in this movie. This is the cap of their trilogy." Like they didn't know that they were making more of these, and this was going to be the send off.
Yeah, but Dylan, we found two guests who apparently really like the Ewoks.
Yeah. Now the Ewoks are great, and you know if you're a kid, you really love the Ewoks, which is all that's important.
They got a spin-off TV show.
I love the Ewoks, but
Yeah, now-
I didn't need a spin-off TV show.
I'm surprised we don't see more Ewok cosplay. That feels like the perfect opportunity.
Like a kid.
Yeah, if you're like an adult Star Wars fan that has a child, you just dress them as an
I
Ewok.
think putting a kid in like that full body costume would be like child abuse. It's probably so hot.
I mean, it's just like a onesie. You don't have to. I mean, you don't have to do like the full face or anything.
The Star Wars furry crossover cosplay community that like only does Ewok cosplay.
Or they do Wookiees.
Yeah.
Depending on your height, you're one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have to talk about that. Anyway, any final thoughts here on the Star Wars original trilogy that you guys want to get out until next year when we talk about the sequel trilogy and we're sad? That's right. You guys like the sequel trilogy. I like Force Awakens. We'll talk about it next year.
I do feel like there's something about the way people talk about Star Wars that feels almost like incomplete, or at least like I don't think I totally understand or like share. And it is kind of the like Star Wars is my childhood thing. Like when people talk generally about its significance and like why they like it, it feels like they often will be like, well, it's fun and it's funny and it's a cool adventure and I love all the like the stuff that they make and the aliens and the ships. People get really into like the ships and stuff like that. I don't really think the fact that it's about overthrowing the government is like given the significance it should. I feel like because the fantasy isn't just like heroism or something. It's not just like saving people. It's like really going to the ends of like the capability of a human being to like retake my own freedom from this thing. And I'm inclined to feel like that hits on a deeper level than is usually discussed. I would think that like what makes Star Wars is probably more the presence of the Empire than it is the Jedi, which think about something like Andor, I feel like really brings that.
Yeah, I mean, it's what makes Andor so interesting as a show, because the entire show is about how you fight against imperialism and the machinations of that on like a micro level, on like a planetary level, what the different groups are doing. And the original Star Wars films are like a desensitized version of that. It's like the kiddie version of it, where you don't see the actual like horrific stuff that you assume is happening under this empire. You're seeing it through the lens of, of Jedi and the Force, and the more like colorful, like dumbed down aspects of it. It's definitely interesting. I also say you can't say Star Wars is your childhood unless you were like literally a kid in the late 70s, early 80s. Otherwise, you didn't like literally grow up with Star Wars. Or like in our case, like we grew up with the prequels. You could say it in that regard. You could say like the prequels were our childhood, because like that was the Star Wars for us.
I mean, I think you can say it because like the movies existed when we were kids. So if that was like all you watched on VHS, then it was your childhood. I don't think something had to have come out when you were a child.
I mean, I think from like a cultural perspective, at least, from like a personal level, yeah, anything could be your childhood.
Yeah.
I watched the original trilogy more as a child because the prequels were scary. And my dad used to say they were too scary because they aren't. Like, they are a little bit more like gritty. They go a little bit deeper into, because they're giving more backstory to things. Whereas the original trilogy is really like surface level.
Yeah,
like,
they're not explaining a ton of
right.
stuff.
They're not getting into the like scary things. So the first movies we watched were the original trilogy because they're easier for kids to watch. And I was watching those like for as early as you can show Star Wars to kids.
Yeah, that's why. Like, I'm always in agreement that if you're showing the films to somebody for the first time, at bare minimum, you need to start with A New Hope. Wherever you go from there, whether you're doing the what's it called, the machete order,
Yeah.
where you go to the prequels right after A New Hope, you got to start with A New Hope because it's the film that assumes you know nothing about the franchise, and it's not overly explaining things. And you can't start with Phantom Menace because you can't start with the
negotiation.
Yeah, you can't start with the blockading of trade routes. Especially, that's way too poignant to current politics now. We got space tariffs.
Let me think. My takeaways. I love C-3PO. That guy's awesome.
I laughed more at the C-3PO stuff on this rewatch than I think I ever did.
Good.
It's like,
Even though Anthony Daniels in real life is pretty annoying, like C-3PO he's cool.
every time something would happen, and then the camera would just cut to C-3PO for a reaction. But he can't react because his face doesn't move. So it just cuts to him still, and then it cuts back to the stuff that's happening, and it's like perfect comedic relief with very little. Yeah, it's so good.
There's a great story of I think it's in one of the prequels where Anthony Daniels is trying to get like a heroic moment for C-3PO, and he goes to George Lucas, and George Lucas is like, "No, he's always scared."
That's so great. Yeah, and then he's really good in Spanish too.
Spanish Anthony Daniels.
Yeah. He still has like a British accent, but in Spanish. It's really good.
Yeah, I do appreciate that not everybody in these movies has a British accent. Carrie Fisher has an accent for like 3 lines.
In the middle of the movie, too.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. I didn't realize that when I was reading.
It's like a creative decision, clearly, that they like made on the fly. They're like, no, just speak American. You're fine.
And you can tell they shot the movie in a different order because like for the first part she doesn't have an accent, and then when she meets Vader for the first time she has like a really strong British accent, and then it's gone again at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And then half the characters call her Leia and the other half call her Leah.
Yeah.
And they're like, who cares?
That goes into all 3 movies, so
I love it.
Anyway, that's Star Wars, the original trilogy. Check them out if you haven't seen them before. They're pretty good. We gave them 5 stars and said they were underrated. Thanks to our guests for coming by again this year. We'll see you on the next May 4th.
I'm so excited to see you guys.
Or maybe we'll get you back for an Andor episode. If you guys want to do an Andor episode, we'll do an Andor episode. We'll get really deep in the weeds of space politics.
Yeah, I would do Andor.
Cool.
You guys have anything you want to plug for the pod, for the listeners at home?
No.
nah.
Jason, you have anything to plug?
Check out SideQuest. Check out the Underground Donut Tours.
Go see New Hope at the Mann Center. The orchestra's doing New Hope.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing a re-release of Revenge of the Sith right now, which apparently is going to make like a ton of money this weekend that we're recording it.
Yeah, you can see it in 4DX.
So
I'm really tempted.
So it's the 20-year anniversary of Revenge of the Sith, which Revenge of the Sith is the first movie I ever went to midnight release. It's the movie that like I found out that midnight releases were a thing.
Yeah, and they're not really a thing anymore.
No, the first, like a midnight release nowadays is like
It's like a
7
2
p.m.
yes, 7 p.m. Thursday. Just say the movie's releasing on Thursday at that point.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of the Over Under Movies podcast. Check us out on all of our socials, on YouTube. You can see our cool little couch setup here. We are on all the podcast apps, Apple Pods, Spotify. We're on TikTok. We're going to be stepping up our TikTok game in the next coming months. So check us out there as well. Join our Discord server. Talk about movies with us. Check out all of our stuff on Letterboxd. And then hit us up on Patreon. We have a free tier on Patreon, so you have no excuse to join our Patreon. You get your name in the end credits, regardless of which payment tier you're on. Our lowest tier is $2. Come hang out with us. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of the Over Under Movies podcast. We will see you at the movies.
Bye.
We out. That's it. Go home. Bye.
Bye.